On tonight's episode of Manhood, Race, and Culture, we are going to pierce what could actually be considered one of the biggest questions afflicting African Americans, and it is quite simply what happened to our ancestors? Meaning, during the transatlantic slave trade, what actually happened to them? Where did they go? What were their cultural values? And overall, what did they experience once they hit the North American continent? So, thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope that this discussion is illuminating for you. Welcome to Manhood, Race, and Culture, a site that deals with manhood, race, and culture. On this site, what you will find is quite simply interesting, intelligent, informed discussions about African American manhood, about race and racial politics, and about the culture that undergirds so much that African Americans deal with here in America. Please feel free to join in, and remember to like, subscribe, and push the notification button so that you will be aware of any new programming that we place up on the site. Now, we all know that African Americans have had a very storied legacy of trials and tribulations, of successes and failures within this nation. Having said that, this site is aimed at examining, illuminating, and seeking to understand not only the historic issues that lead us to where we are right now, but also the myriad of ongoing issues dealing with African American men, African American women, ideas of manhood, femininity, masculinity, and above and beyond everything else, we're seeking to have a conversation that will edify, illuminate, and ultimately, at the end, serve to uplift Black America out of its historic position of being a have-not. So welcome and enjoy. Any attempt to understand the contemporary plight of Black folks has got to begin with an analysis of Akibulan, or Africa. And for our purposes here, we're going to go ahead and sort of begin this discussion with what is one of my favorite books of all time, and it is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. If you engage Things Fall Apart, one of the things that you will soon discover is that the African has a fully developed society. They're not swinging from trees or any of that. And to be honest with you, there isn't a reasonable argument that can be made to say that the Europeans are more culturally, intellectually advanced than the African. There's not a single reasonable argument that could justify such thought. However, if you read Things Fall Apart, what you'll soon realize is quite simply that the African was absolutely fine before the European arrived. However, there is one chink in the armor of Africans, and it is quite simply that they are devoid of what I term the other. Many of my students have a hard time understanding this question, and the question is quite simply, how do you know that you're Black? And many of them will say, well, I can look in the mirror. I can, look around. And the truth of the matter is that you know that you're black because white folk exist in this nation. They are the other. The African does not have the other. So when you speak with continental Africans and you ask them who they are or where they're from, if they don't think you understand anything about geography, world history, or what have you, they'll simply give you a bland answer of, I'm from Africa. If you press them, they'll say, well, I'm Nigerian. If you press them even more, they may very well tell you their quote unquote ethnic identity. I'm Igbo, I'm Tutsi, I'm Hausa, Ashanti. This leads to, in many ways, as I said, a chink in their armor. They're not really solidified in the way that black folk in America should be, and sometimes are solidified, because we have that other that we bounce our ideas against. We rally to protect our resources and hopefully to gain additional resources from what we deem hostile populations that surround us. So when you read Chinua Achebe's book, you'll find that the arrival of Europeans is a major issue, major theme in the book, because in many ways the title of the book is Things Fall Apart. They are the central catalyst to making things fall apart. You'll see these Europeans come in, and keep in mind the first that come in are the missionaries. They have on what Christians refer to as the full armor of God, and that allows them to penetrate inside of what they have deemed the dark continent. And not dark just because of the people, it's dark because Europeans do not understand that the African is actually more advanced than they are. But these Europeans who come, they institute a religious base. They bring an actual physical school that's going to educate, so-called educate, the African children, the people of Umofia, which is where Things Fall Apart is set. And this is going to lead to the destruction of their culture. Because although they didn't have a physical school, they transmitted their way through experience and word of mouth. There are people who have a glorious culture that is in every way shared and transmitted generation by generation. The referenced absence of nationalism, of solidarity, is going to lead to some very different things occurring within Africa. First off, you're going to have the arrival of Europeans. Many of them are going to settle along the coast as far as creating these, what they like to term castles, but they're actually dungeons. But inside of Africa, because you have an absence of a developed sense of nationalism, you have different warring tribes. And the European does a great job of sliding in there and basically saying, listen, we will provide you with guns, trinkets, and what have you. What we demand in repayment is going to solely be your prisoners of war. Now, I want to sort of emphasize this idea that Africans had slavery going on. This is true. If you read, once again, Chinua Achebe's book, he talks about the murder of a daughter of Umofia, and they're going to have her replaced by another fertile young woman and also a boy, Ikmefuna, who is going to, in every way, serve somewhat as Okonkwo's son for a period of his life. However, what we have to really understand about African slavery is that it's a misrepresentation to even refer to it as the same type of slavery that Africans practice. European slavery is something totally different the African could never imagine. Within African slavery, you're able to become actually a citizen of that society. Of course, you couldn't with European slavery. So you will see photos like the one that you're looking at right now, that if you don't understand the larger context of what is going on, you could be fooled and deduced into believing that we're only looking at one form of slavery. Nothing could be further from the truth. The African could not conceive what Europeans had planned for what ultimately, although they failed to realize it, their brethren that they were sending to ships and slave dungeons. One of the most remarkable stories that we have surrounding the transatlantic slave trade comes from a gentleman by the name of Olaudah Equiano. Equiano is actually going to be transported to the New World, become educated, and I want to say that he ends up dying somewhere in Europe. But Equiano writes about his story. And what Equiano is going to say is that, number one, he was from the interior. He had never even seen the ocean before. And he had been captured by slave catchers. And these slave catchers were African. And they're going to be walked to the coast. And Equiano is going to write that they shifted hands several times. So there's almost like a relay of Africans who are working to get them to the dungeons. Once they're in the dungeons, they would often stay there for weeks until a captain shows up and purchases them. And you have to remember that the African is participating in this process the entire way. It's the African who's able to tell Europeans, no, you don't want to put that many Ashanti on there. You don't want to put that many Igbo together because you will be facing a mutiny. However, our people were put on these ships, and as you can see from the graphics that are in front of you, they were packed in because this is a business. Make no mistake about it. These slavers, these ship captains, are purchasing humans, transporting them, and they want them to survive, and they want to be able to get the best price that they can get. It's one of the most shocking aspects of American history. If I were a betting man, I would wager that the most underestimated or misunderstood aspect of the transatlantic slave trade flows from the fact that we really cannot comprehend how many humans were taken from Africa and transported across the Atlantic. This is arguably one of the gravest misrepresentations of world history. Consider for a moment that millions of people are transported during what is rightfully termed the African Holocaust, which is the largest Holocaust and the longest Holocaust that has ever occurred on planet Earth. Many of my students and many people in general fail to realize the enormity of this process. And they likewise fail to realize that stolen Africans, and let's be clear, that's what they are. Stolen Africans were transported principally in 3 locations in the quote-unquote New World. The Caribbean would be number 1. A close second is going to be Brazil. Don't be fooled by Brazilians speaking Portuguese. Don't be fooled into thinking that they're not Africans. Look at Carnival. If that's not Africa, I don't know what it is. And a distant third, and I mean a very distant third, are those ships that arrived in the British colonies on the North American continent. To drive home this point to you, I'm attaching a video that will show you a representation of the transatlantic slave trade in 2 very short minutes, and realize that every dot that you're going to see represents many slave ships. In many ways, it's an astounding representation of what occurred to persons of African descent. It's one of the reasons why, as you watch this, hopefully you'll understand Marcus Garvey's contention of Pan-Africanism, because you have a whole lot more kindred in the Western Hemisphere than you could ever imagine. After viewing this video, one is hard pressed to really fight against the idea that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth millions. Obviously, what we've just seen is quite simply millions, if not tens of millions, of stolen Africans being forcibly transported across the Atlantic. Just ponder that. How many people? We're talking about centuries of exploitation of Africans for their labor, for their reproductive rights, for their knowledge of how to grow, of how to live. The African Holocaust, make no mistake about it, is by far the worst tragedy that has ever happened to any people on the face of the planet Earth. Now, having said that, we're still here. By some miraculous way, we are still here. Make no mistake about it, we're here for a reason. A reason that is still unfolding, still evolving. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we have the ability to continue to fight, to resist, to strive for a better day. I'd like to take this moment and thank you for visiting Manhood, Race, and Culture. We greatly appreciate you viewing our videos. We greatly appreciate any comments, any suggestions, any videos that you would like for us to deal with, plus any issues that you would like to have addressed in this space. So, as I always say, kick your shoes off and make yourself comfortable. And consider this a home away from home. The one thing that we are asking is that you subscribe, share, like, push the notification button. We're a new channel and we're trying to grow our audience, trying to grow our influence to really reseize, reclaim the narrative of black folk in this nation, to paint a picture of who we actually are from our lens, the good and the bad. So once again, thank you. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and push that notification button. It will be greatly appreciated, and you will certainly be illuminated by doing such. Once again, thank you.